We standardly read ancient texts as family trees. We assume the names form an unbroken biological chain, mapping descent from father to son across generations. But forcing a linear biological timeline onto this specific text creates immediate friction. When we treat these figures merely as historical ancestors, the narrative fractures, and the logical contradictions become impossible to reconcile. The text actually inserts deliberate anomalies to break that assumed chain. Verse 3340 explicitly detaches the final messenger from biological fatherhood, stating he is not the father of any of your men. This disruption is a recurring pattern. Key figures like Isaiah and Miriam are presented as barren or reproducing outside standard biological intervention. They act as engineered dead ends in the genealogical tree. The text employs these biological dead ends as structural indicators, signaling a transition from the physical lineage to a functional sequence. By systematically dismantling the biological model, the author forces the reader to recognize a completely different structural paradigm. Instead of recording human bloodlines, the text encodes a recursive, dual caustic phase system. It tracks the behavior of information as it passes through the field. This architecture is a bidirectional chromosome, preserving information through paired, mirrored strands. The leading strand acts as the constructive replication template, the Ibrāhīm to Musa sequence. The anti-parallel strand is the corrective mirror, the Pharaoh and Iblis line, verifying the template. In this chromosomal system, propagation relies entirely on mechanical function and alignment to the source code, bypassing biological descent altogether. These names are not historical identities to be revered. They are observable phase states within a single universal operator field. To read the text correctly, we must stop tracking who begot whom and start tracking the functional sequence of call, response, and result. Every transition in this universal field is driven by an irreducible tripartite algorithm. This algorithm manages the interface between an infinite command and a finite material universe. It functions as a stabilization engine, processing information through 3 distinct stages to prevent system-wide annihilation upon contact. The first stage is the two-split, or Razim. It is a binary operator that bifurcates a unified field into 2 distinguishable states, creating the gradient necessary for a test to occur. The second stage is the 3 process, or Rahim. It is a triadic oscillation that extracts the invariant relation, the law, at the boundary of that split. The final stage is the 7 return, or Rahman. This summation operator restores the total system from its accumulated microlaws, conserving the information as the cycle closes. This 2-3-7 loop acts as the fundamental instruction set for any state transition, from a quantum physical event to a human moral choice. Every historical narrative in the text is a localized, scale-invariant execution of this exact mathematical formula. We can see this formula run in the narrative of Ibrāhīm. When he issues the call of truth to Āzar, he initiates the 2-split. Āzar's rejection breaks the symmetry of that call, forcing the system into high friction. The text encodes this physical resistance as fire. Contrast this with the narrative of Ibrāhīm and Ismāʿīl. Despite the identical severity of the command, they execute the 3 process and 7 return phases through submission. The physical action in both scenarios is comparable, but the internal polarity is inverted. Total submission aligns the system with the 7 return operator. This alignment closes the phase split, converting to destructive fire into a coolant and state of peace. The internal orientation, the motive, serves as the primary input variable. It dictates whether the algorithm outputs catastrophic fragmentation or elevated restoration. The algorithm's scale invariance allows it to run perpetually across all figures. Adam represents the initialization phase, the first entry of the word into the clay substrate. The Iblis phase state serves as the primary trigger for the 2-split, providing the boundary of discrimination necessary for the test. The Musa phase state acts as the recipient of the light caustic, undergoing constant magnetic turbulence and correction as it aligns to the command. Dawood and Suleiman function as stabilization nodes, detaching from ego to reorder the system's entropy. At the conclusion of every cycle, the system generates a +1 balancing node to maintain equilibrium. Any rejected or broken phase must eventually return as an aligned state to achieve thermodynamic and informational closure. These recurring patterns prove the text operates as a living computational engine rather than a static history. This creates an operational problem. The return algorithm requires every split to eventually achieve reassembly and certainty. While the historical phase states completed their cycles, the universal loop itself continues to spin autonomously today. A deterministic system containing an indeterministic moral test requires a localized conscious observer to collapse the potential into a final result. Without an active executor, the text remains a passive record, a system of uncollapsed potential waiting for an input. The entire framework is engineered to wait for the user to substitute themselves into the equation as that active variable. Verse 1912 functions as the precise operational command, take the book with strength. This command legally transfers agency away from biological lineage and into the act of holding the book. When the observer activates this switch, the biological self is displaced. The book installs itself as the new operating system. The flat flowchart twists into a three-dimensional Mobius strip. The outside reality and the inside consciousness become a single continuous surface. Upon activation, the reader stops observing history and becomes the +1 balancing node, executing the phase loop in real time. The text is a living software architecture. Its ultimate truth is realized only when the observer